It is Friday, September 8th. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone, to another pricey episode of LTPS. As always, let's begin with our PlayStation Plus reminder. The September PS Plus Essential Games are live on PSN, so if you're still a member, then you might want to go ahead and claim those. And also, just as another reminder, the pricing is now in effect, the new pricing, I should say, and something where if you do have an upcoming renewal before November 6th, then you technically are still grandfathered in for a very brief period to be renewed with the old pricing. So, based on where you stand on being subscribed or not, you can either let that go through, but if you make any changes to your membership, then you are going to get locked into the new pricing. So there is a small little grace period for those that have a renewal coming up, but otherwise the new pricing is now live on PSN. But anyway, moving on to our first news story, we have a new patch for Final Fantasy XVI, patch 1.10, and this one not only includes changes, fixes, improvements, but also free content as well. So there's new alternate outfits for Jill, Clive, Torgal, and one other character, and you can also transmog Clive's sword now, which I love when games let you do this, especially when sometimes the game's story is trying to sell you on some kind of sentimental item in the game, which, no spoilers here, but there's a sword you get early on, and it's okay, you kind of, they're selling this idea that you want to keep using the sword because there's a sentimental value to the protagonist, but it's an RPG. You're going to drop it pretty quickly because you pick up better items and equipment and things like that, right? So it's always a little silly, and you do still have to progress far enough to have the ability to transmog, but at least you can do it, and I really wish more games let you do this if they have any sort of RPG elements. Now, anyway, they also added a free sword that you can redeem in the system menu. That's called the Onion Sword, so cool little callback there. But in terms of the gameplay department, there's been some adjustments here as well. So one thing is that for smaller enemies, they remain vulnerable longer in the air, so it's a lot easier to pull off and continue aerial combos, which I can see why they are doing that, because it's not really something that's easy to get off in this game. And then iconic abilities can be activated faster after successful parries. Good to see that. Cooldown times for abilities is now more clearly shown in the abilities menu, and if you have an accessory that alters those times, then it shows that. So that was certainly something that was bothering me during my playthrough, so good to see that that's there. And then like we said, there's a number of new fixes, changes, and adjustments to the arcade mode and also system settings. So if you're just starting out a playthrough, you might want to check out the new controller layouts and things like that. So there's a number of things that they put in there. But this game is certainly going to have a long-term content roadmap, not just in terms of what you would hope are nice, frequent updates with some free stuff, but moreover, they are going to monetize this game further, which goes into our next news story. The producer, Naoki Yoshida, has confirmed that yes, they are working on 2 new paid DLC expansions at some point, or rather they're going to release them at some point, but the team has started working on them now, alongside the PC development as well. So that is underway, and something where they hope to have more info and share it by the end of this year. So looking back at, I guess going back before the game came out, this was something where they talked about wanting to make the game a more complete experience and something you can play from start to finish, and it doesn't necessarily need DLC, and I would say they've accomplished that, but it is still something where they were more or less saying, well, if people like these characters, if the world resonates with them, then sure, we would be open to it, which I feel like that was not a guarantee that it was certainly going to happen, but, considering Square would love to monetize the game as much as possible, yeah, I think this was all but a lock once we saw the game did do reasonably well on PS5. And we knew a PC version was not going to be that far behind PlayStation 5, so if you were looking to play this game on PC, then yeah, we shouldn't have to wait too long. But for the DLC, yeah, I'm on board, because I really do love the characters and the world that they have fleshed out in this game, which I think is really chalked up to, well, I mean, obviously the creative team behind it, but I just love the active time lore. It's been so fun just pausing the game whenever I want to in that moment, and then read all that lore stuff, and it's easy to get lost into. So yeah, I'm ready for more content on this game, absolutely. Moving on to our next news story. This one, I feel like I would be remiss to not bring this up, but Baldur's Gate 3, now on PlayStation 5. And this title has been I guess we can throw it into the laundry list of what has been a really, really solid year for video games. It's just been such good software coming out on a fairly consistent basis. And it's not like you can play everything, but, based on what you're into, it seems like this year probably had something that, people would enjoy, that you might enjoy based on what you're into. But this game in particular, I mean, my God, scored a 96, well, averaged out on Metacritic for the PC version. That would be the PS5 one just came out, so that one only has like 9 or 10 reviews, but that one's at a 97 last time I checked, which that's the upper 90s. I mean, it's exceptional, right? And this kind of goes into like a little oh geez, do we really want to do this? I don't know, like a mini rant when it comes to the review aggregate sites like Metacritic or OpenCritic. Obviously that's a really good score, but I mean, that's something where Baldur's Gate 3 on PlayStation 5 may very well be the best reviewed PS5 game. Not only now, but it may not be topped. It is so difficult to score something like that, right? Not only does it have to be a really good game, but it's just, and this is where people get tripped up, right? That's why this is kind of a rant. Like 15 something years ago, it's not the same anymore, right? That's why you've got these big blockbuster games that come out, and so many people are like laser focused on those review sites and seeing what the game scores just to have that sort of ammo for console warble or whatever on online. But God forbid 2 or 3 different sites have a review that's a little bit lower, like Starfield's going through this FUD right now. And that might bring down the average a little bit, but it's like, I feel like people don't realize that if a game scores in the, 80s, anywhere in the 80s, that's not only good, I would argue that's a really great video game. But everyone wants to see their next big major title coming out that they're excited for. They want to see it do 90 plus, which it's just not like it was 15 years ago where there were less sites, and if a big blockbuster title came out, chances are, as long as enough sites liked it, I mean, it was going to hold a pretty high average no matter what. But now we've got a lot more sites. Some are, a bit smaller than some of the bigger sites, but I digress. It's a matter of, with Baldur's Gate 3 doing a 96, 97 on PS5, it is very likely going to stay up there, and it is a very approachable game, by the way. Like, if you've never played D&D, it's still something where it's totally worth checking out. And the other part of this news, I guess we should get to, is that Larian Studios recently talked on the PlayStation blog about how, for this game, they did build it for console from day one. So they were talking about how they used radial menus and how that was the most intuitive option for adopting their UI to console. They talk about using the DualSense haptics and triggers, even the light indicator, to match all the actions and statuses while playing the game. And one really clever use of the triggers is you can do a light pull, and that lets you peek at the radial menu if you need to briefly check something. And then if you do a hard press, that'll open the menu and just keep it open, which it's subtle, but I love when studios do something with the triggers where, I guess pressing halfway down invokes some kind of response or pulls up some kind of menu or it's some kind of gameplay mechanic. We've not seen enough of that, and to a lot of studios' credit, we've seen a lot of developers use the DualSense across the board. I mean, the haptics, triggers, the light, still not really the touchpad. That goes back to the PS4 days, right? That's the first year of PS4, and then we don't really ever see swipe gestures with the touchpad. But the new stuff on DualSense, a lot of studios do use it in very subtle ways, and sometimes they can be a little bit more aggressive. We still haven't seen anything quite like Astro's Playroom, but I do find that game is so exaggerated as a demo reel of like, here's what you can do with this thing. But having said that, I wish more studios did inputs that use the half press on L2 or R2, because it can be really intuitive for whatever the game's trying to do. And in this case, something as simple as like, quickly checking a menu, but you don't want to, keep the menu open. I love it. I want to see more of that. Good on Larian for putting that in Baldur's Gate 3 on PlayStation 5. Next up, let's talk about Ratatan, the spiritual successor to the Patapon franchise, the beloved PlayStation IP. We saw this Kickstarter go live for this new studio, which was the former Patapon creator wanting to make a spiritual successor. And the Kickstarter is now over, and they raised a lot of money, 220 million yen, which is a lot more than their initial 20 million ask. They reached nearly all stretch goals, and they do mention in the FAQ that they're far along enough in production that they hope to to, and they feel confident that they're going to ship by April 2025. And that is the big caveat. We've seen with a lot of Kickstarter projects that, and this is always like regardless of, I guess, what is going on with that particular game right now. Obviously, it's a bit more sketchy when it's a brand new studio from people that you've never heard of in the games business, but even from established names and former devs from all these different studios and this and that, and they're doing their own thing now. Game dev can still be exponentially more expensive than what they even raised during this campaign. So we see that sometimes these games just, they either take much longer to come out or they don't come out, period. But they say they feel confident that they're going to ship by April 2025. So not too long of a wait. And again, if you're into Patapon, this is pretty much the successor that you are going to get from the Patapon creator themselves. Moving on to Naughty Dog's Neil Druckmann. Recently speaking with Entertainment Weekly, he talked about a lot of what he's doing right now, his current work, The Last of Us TV show, and of course their next game. He doesn't really say too much, but he does talk a bit about how he's kind of in a weird spot where he's spread out all over these different projects with The Last of Us TV show, the game, providing feedback on that theme park thing that is going on right now. But as for the TV show, he does confirm that they've outlined all of Season 2 and that they're ready to start pretty much as soon as the strike is over. And we already heard that from Craig Mazin, where he was able to submit the script for Episode 1 right before the strike, and right now he's basically just writing the whole thing in his head while the strike is ongoing. And then as for the next big Naughty Dog game, Neil says, and I quote here, "As far as the next game at Naughty Dog, I can't say anything. My comms director over there will slaughter me." So being a little bit playful with that answer, but given that, Naughty Dog kind of went through this, I don't want to say turmoil, but some kind of situation that was likely not something they were happy to deal with, which is that multiplayer project. Right now, we did have that report come out suggesting that a lot of people got moved off it, and it was being retooled, or Bungie stepped in, and under their sort of post-mortem on the project, and I guess the progress, they had some sort of feedback that really put that project either on hold or really slowed down the progression of it. But either way, we had that report, and that was after we had already gotten this sort of drip feed after drip feed announcement relating to that project, right, where they were very public about it, saying that yes, we're working on a full-scale multiplayer standalone game, our first one, which is certainly a big deal. Then getting concept art, then more concept art. It just sort of seemed clear that they were on a path to probably showing it soon, up until the Bungie integration, and then Naughty Dog having to step out and say, no, we are still working on this thing. But studios don't really want to be in a place where it gets to that, where a report comes out about them, or they have to put out some kind of public statement, and it certainly doesn't help given the timing of them seemingly being close to possibly doing a formal reveal, right, assuming whatever they had planned before Bungie stepped in was what they were going to launch with. But that's just one example, right? I mean, I think it's in most studios' best interests to not talk about things until they really do have something substantial to show, and that they feel comfortable showing it, and that they're going to be shipping the project within, a year or so, which would be really ideal, not announcing a title. Then we have this 3, 4, 5-year roadmap, although that does still tend to happen, obviously. But I think that's kind of where they are. So with this other big title that he's presumably referring to, I would gather that they still want more time before they're ready to talk about that game. And that doesn't mean it's like far away. They did ship The Last of Us Part 2 in 2020. I figure they're making good progress on it, but still going to be a little bit more, I think. Next up, we have what might just be the most important news story from this past week, and it's this viral post on Twitter/X from the official PlayStation UK account, where they say, and I quote here, "Treat yourself to 19 inches of Venom and more with Marvel Spider-Man 2 Collector's Edition." Treat yourself to 19 inches of Venom and more with Marvel Spider-Man 2 Collector's Edition. These are very specific words placed in a very specific order, and so you might want to tread lightly on pre-ordering the Collector's Edition, or just at the very least know what you're getting into, or what's getting into you. But the point is, this was really funny. So yeah, this was a viral post for sure. It got a lot of engagement. Whoever it was responsible for this tweet, good on you. You knew exactly what you were doing, and That was very humorous to see. I mean, it really it drove so much engagement. It really overshadowed the real Insomniac news here, which is they put out all these new promotional images for Spider-Man 2, which were cool to see. Nothing crazy, though. It's just really, I think it's more a matter of, we're getting close enough as is. The game is shipping in October, so we're about 40-something days away from it finally coming out. And that means it should be a matter of weeks until we get like a full-blown marketing campaign where they're really starting to, go nuts with it. And this is very much a game that is going to demand that kind of marketing campaign. So between that and maybe Insomniac has more plans to show more of the game, not entirely sure how much more they're really going to do, given that we already have, we had extended gameplay from the last PlayStation Showcase. We had the story trailer at Comic-Con. We had the plates come out, the controller, the console's already out, all the unboxings are out there. So, but we're getting very close, so we should be expecting more about the game and more advertisements, really. That's what's really going to be inundating every aspect of where you can see an advertisement, I would have to imagine. Now, in somewhat related Insomniac news, SAG-AFTRA, the Screen Actors Guild and American Federation of Television and Radio Artists, has voted unanimously to send a strike authorization vote to members for their upcoming bargaining dates with video game companies. So this does include studios like Activision, EA, Epic Games, Take-Two, Insomniac, and more. Now, the reason for this is that there's already been ongoing negotiations in connection with their current contract. That's the Interactive Media Agreement. This is separate from TV and film and primarily covers video games. But the key issues that they're stuck on is pretty much the same from Hollywood studios, or the same issues they have with Hollywood studios. It's not only about pay increases, but also protections from AI as well. So SAG-AFTRA's chief negotiator Duncan Crabtree Ireland says, and I quote here, "The voice and performance capture artists who bring video game characters to life deserve a contract that reflects the value they bring to the multi-billion-dollar gaming industry. Voice and performance capture AI are already becoming the most advanced uses of AI. The threat is here, and it is real. Without contractual protections, the employers are asking performers to unknowingly participate in the extinction of their artistry and livelihoods." So this was probably going to happen, not because of the writer's strike or the SAG strike with Hollywood studios. That's very much been separate from games, but the problem is that they do have their own contract with game studios, and now negotiations are happening, and sure enough, it's the pay, it's the AI, and pay has always been kind of a sticking point in games because the pay structure is much different for voiceover and performance capture work compared to TV and film, right? So that's always been a soft spot, and there's more issues that they put on the SAG site, but for AI, this is also a really big sort of transformative moment for all these entertainment sectors, given that, it's unregulated. There's nothing federally that says how you can and cannot use AI, and that's why all these massive corporations, across the board and all these different industries are finding ways to use AI, and they're completely unregulated, and they can, use it to replace human work. And let's face it, if you're going to offer a company a way to, increase profit margins, they are absolutely going to do it, especially when it costs them next to nothing. You know what I mean? They can just start cutting labor across the board, and it is a wild west where it's actually great that we have these ongoing strikes to hopefully have some protections for human workers in what is a very creative field. And in games, I find this is really fascinating, given that the complex nature of how you make a game, and it always depends on the engine, the amount of people on the team, what they're trying to build, what aspects are they really utilizing with making that game. I guess somewhat related would be procedural generation. Like, that's one way to sort of avoid all these complex handcrafted environments. There are certain aspects of game creation that just take a lot of human work that, some may argue there's a place for adapting AI into the game development process where it doesn't replace human workers. That's just a very sort of early speculative thought that has been floating around, right? How do we actually go about doing this where it does not replace human creators on the ground really making these things, and being able to have a job is also the most important part. There's a lot to be said on the topic, but for now, what we can say is that nothing is concrete. They haven't even actually begun the strike. This is simply a vote out to members to confirm if they are going to do it when the bargaining starts happening, which would be later this month. So again, they have end dates throughout near the end of September. So we'll follow this story and see where it goes. But yeah, video games were not safeguarded from these issues. They're very much a video game thing as well. So this was bound to happen. Now, in other big industry news, the former chairman of PlayStation Worldwide Studios, Shawn Layden, was recently speaking with Christopher Dring for last week's Games Industry.biz Summit in Seattle, and he was sharing his views about the games business and also what might threaten it in the coming years. So, to summarize a bit of what he said, he points to non-endemic companies like Google, Amazon, Netflix, and Apple posing the biggest threat to games. So, as an example, he points to what Netflix did to the movie business or Apple to music, and he says ideally he hopes gaming will be the first industry that disrupts itself. A really interesting counterpoint that came of this is when Christopher Dring said that, at one point Sony and Microsoft, they themselves would have been considered non-endemic when entering games. Layden responded with, and I quote here, "Sony knew enough that entertainment was its own beast, so electronics knew it couldn't manage this business by taking the guys from the CD division and go after games. So in the initial stages of the company, it was a joint venture between Sony Electronics and Sony Music Japan. They knew they had to bring the entertainment right from the beginning. The people handling the advertising, marketing, publisher relations, PR, those were all Sony Music guys, and they were soliciting publishers to support the platform. PlayStation knew that we couldn't do what Sega and Nintendo did and provide the bulk of the software. We didn't know enough how to make it. We had to be the third-party platform, so we had to get Namco, Square, EA, Activision. Those Sony Music guys are the ones that got Square to move Final Fantasy VII off of Nintendo and onto PlayStation. Probably the biggest sea change move. So yeah, we weren't endemic, but I think we brought the entertainment piece in, which really helped accelerate the success of PlayStation." Shawn also says that he thinks the rising costs in gaming is going to be an existential threat to all of us, and that when it comes to this massive mega consolidation that we're seeing, it's stifling creativity, or as he puts it, it's an enemy of creativity. So really interesting comments from Shawn, if only because I'm happy to see him talk more and more in the public view, which, sometimes these high-ranking executives, when they leave, they stay very quiet. They go off and do their own thing in a completely different field. They'll join a chairman board somewhere else or whatever the case may be, but at least he's talking, because this is what I like most about when these high-ranking executives do leave, is that if they do talk, we see them talk freely about the business they were working in, and maybe at a certain point they'll talk more about their time at that place. So for Shawn, good to see him doing that. There's a timeline where I cannot wait to see when Phil leaves Xbox, just so he can be more candid about his time there and how he feels about the business and this and that. I think he's got probably a lot of interesting stories. Not to say I want him to leave, but when he does leave, I look forward to what I presume is probably going to be Phil being an open book. He seems like the type that would be willing to do a lot of interviews and things like that. But at least in the case of what Shawn is saying, there's a lot here to go over. Not sure we have enough time to really dive into all these topics in a 20-30 minute show. But a lot of his points I do tend to agree with. And it's something where he's said these things before, right? Like the rising costs in gaming, at least with game development, how it costs so much money to put out these big AAA titles that, PlayStation Studios was shipping and is shipping still. Also the unsustainability of subscription. He's been pretty candid about that as well. And with the non-endemics, we saw that with Google recently with Stadia, right? So that's kind of a case study there, how one company tried to get in, but we saw that wasn't really all that easy. So there's a lot to be said with a number of these topics, but at least for how Shawn feels on these things, that's his opinion that he recently put out during the recent summit at GamesIndustry.biz. Moving on to our next news story, I think I might have to rescind my comments from earlier about the most important news story, because it's this one right here, which is Stray. Arguably one of the best games ever made, easily one of the best cat games ever made, is getting a film adaptation from Annapurna Animation. My God, I have not lived until I saw this news. This is awesome. Especially because, I didn't really think about it at first, but seeing this news, I'm like, Yeah, this would be really conducive to adapting to a film. I mean, the game is not that long. It's like 3-4 hours your first way through. And, just based off the length of time, I mean, that is at the very minimum, you don't have to sort of sacrifice a lot or pry apart what made that particular game special to adapt it into a much tighter experience where it's 2 hours long, maybe even shorter, let's say an hour and a half, which would be a very brief movie, I think, by movie runtime standards. But I mean, you can really get away with it, I think, what I think would be a really magical experience within an hour and a half. I'm sorry, maybe I'm just gassing this up a little bit too much, but still, I'm in. Day one, let's do it. So yeah, I guess they're actively working on this, and I'm just so happy that when I first saw the trailer for this game, all jokes aside, and I was like super into it immediately, not knowing much about it at all, I am happy to see that it came out, it was a huge success, and now there might be a real roadmap here for the Stray IP, right? So I'm really happy with how it's all played out for Blue 12 and this game that they made, this really special experience that they put together. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus. So here's what we're doing for now. We're going to try Gleam again. I really want to avoid using one link that takes you to another link. It's just something where if the barrier is as low as possible, we can see more entrants. It seems funny, saying this right to you, the viewer that would be entering, but it really is something where, I mean, not that many people enter already to begin with. If you do an additional link, there's going to be some drop off. You very much, if you enter every week, some people are going to be like, well, I'll just stop entering because they don't want to have to follow a link, go to another link and all that, and it's kind of a hassle. So I want to try and make it as accessible as possible. And what I recently tried was going through because all the flags that come in from YouTube, they're automated, but when I send it off for manual review by disputing them, it does come back okay. So in theory, there is no problem with Gleam. It's always been usable. I used it for 3.5, 4 something years for all these giveaways. So it should be fine for now. We'll try it again, see what happens. It's just that if I can avoid the sort of automated rejection every month, or every week, I should say, then that would be ideal, but we'll try it again. So for the time being, if you would like to win a $10 PSN code, follow the link below. Supporting this channel a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are all the news stories from this past week that I wanted to talk about with you all, and our Tuesday video was looking at PS1 memory cards, exploring them, finishing their save files. A lot of you really enjoyed the PS2 video. That was really cool, and so we of course have to try PlayStation 1, especially because we don't really do enough PS1 stuff on this channel, so if that video does well, then we should try and explore more PS1 topics occasionally, right? Always fun going back to the OG system and those original games, and so it was so fun doing that recent upload, so you can go check that out and bask in all the nostalgia that was very much in that video. But as always, another upload on Tuesday, and that is pretty much it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.